Hello, this is the Leave the Key Real Estate Show. You're here with your host, Larry Wagner, and I have with me today Anthony Iadevaia. He is the attorney that we use for all of our litigation in our business. For those who don't know, we run a real estate investment business where we buy apartment buildings, multifamily houses, but mainly we buy houses where people are in some level of distress or need to move their houses quickly, and we are cash buyers. So our job is to buy a house, typically fix it up and sell it. That's our main gig. But we do own a lot of rentals, and we therefore need an attorney. Anthony, welcome.
How are you, Larry?
I'm doing very well today. So today there's some very hot topics going on with COVID and the new bill that's just passing right now. We're waiting for a signature, and that we're talking about evictions.
Yes, big problem.
But before we get to that, can you just give us a little bit of your background?
My background. All right. So evictions is definitely a part of it. I consider myself a litigator. I'm a real estate attorney handling, basic transactional real estate. And, I dive into a lot of the problems that happen from that, where it be foreclosures, again, evictions, even bankruptcies, litigation, complex litigation, whether it's usually involving some kind of dispute on or property, whether it's a partition action, you got owners that aren't getting along, to fraud, to who the actual owner of the property is. I mean, it gets complex, but I handle that too. And, obviously right now, a big topic is evictions. So right now we're kind of spending a lot of time with that because it's a big concern. It's a problem.
It's a problem. By the way,
absolutely.
I'm going to be talking to you about a partition action maybe when we're done with the show.
Okay.
Something just came up today, and a few unique things I was going to bounce off for you. In this business, having a good quality attorneys, not just one attorney, is very important. Everyone's a specialist and people do certain things. We use a different attorney for our regular real estate transactions, for the buys, the sells, but we call you our specialist and we bring you in as the fixer.
Yeah, the fixer. I was going to say that usually when the problems happen,
That's
when
right.
the transactional side goes wrong, that's usually when, they start seeking for me. Hey, come help.
Right.
So, clean up the mess sometimes.
Clean up the mess.
Right?
And evictions are a big mess today.
It's a big mess, and it's a big part of your business as well, because whether a property is occupied is going to really substantially change, that course of whether or not you're flipping that property quickly or you're going to be holding it and carrying it for a long time. So,
or our rentals, if we're making money and not making money.
Knowing what you're getting into is going to be the biggest mistake that some of these investors make in buying these properties. Hey, what do I do about that person that's in there? Who is that person? How long is it going to take me? And that's, something that's becoming an increasing problem right now more than ever, especially with COVID.
It's one of the biggest reasons we actually get people calling us at leavethekey.com. They reach out to us at leavethekey.com when they have a problem with a piece of real estate. So often it's a rental piece. They've had it for years. The tenants aren't paying. And you're going to let them know today, what are the chances of actually getting that tenant out of that house?
Yeah, it's a big concern. I mean, people don't realize this, but even prior to COVID, in June of 2019, New York State already enacted new revisions of the law. They called it the New York Housing Stability Protection Act. Traditionally, historically, landlords were already disfavored in the law,
Correct.
right? The tenants
In
are
New
always in New York. Yes,
Yes.
Other parts, not so much. But
to be a landlord in Texas.
Yeah. I mean, some parts of Glen Cove historically were good here too. Things moved quickly, but not so much anymore. But basically, again, historically, it was already disfavored to the landlord. And this, new provision that they enacted in 2019 only made that worse. They increased the time. Every provision basically helped the tenant. It didn't help the landlord in any way. And I break evictions down into three parts. You have the notice portion, which is you telling the tenant, hey, you didn't pay rent, or hey, I want my property back, please leave. You have that. Then you have the court process. That's like the second part. And then the third part is the eviction itself. Right. You have a warrant. You have either a marshal or a judge or a sheriff going there executing that warrant of eviction. All three of those parts were extended. They just made it more difficult. They increased the time. So now you have to wait longer before you go to court. When you're actually in court, it's taking longer. Right. And then when you actually win court, if you're successful, you have a warrant, the sheriff is going to take longer, or the marshal is going to take longer in actually evicting the tenant. So it only makes it harder. And this is all prior to COVID, because then obviously we know what we got going on now with the Safe Harbor Act that was enacted this June as well, which deals with COVID, and the governor and the laws basically saying, hey, no evictions based on the failure to pay rent.
Right.
But, some people are taking advantage of what that means. It doesn't mean you don't have to pay rent. You can't be evicted on it. And, that's another problem because, I'm hearing stories of commercial tenants.
Right.
They're not getting kicked out. They're not paying rent. And I understand the situation where if they're not able to operate, they're not paying rent. But what if you're a deli? What if your business increased?
Right.
You're not getting thrown out of your house. You're making more money. And here you are saying to the landlord, well, the governor said I don't have to pay rent.
Right.
And that's not true. And that's not true. And that's what's happening. And the tenants are taking advantage. And it's unfortunate because the people that are getting hurt more than anything are the landlords.
And in New York City, they're actually advertising.
Don't pay.
Buses and subways, you don't have to pay rent.
And that's not right. That's not accurate. That's not what the law says. It just says you can't be evicted based on the non-payment of rent. Right. So judges are reluctant to sign warrants. But you can get a money judgment. And that means you have the responsibility to pay your rent.
But I have a question for you. Because the eviction or lack of eviction is based on the impact of COVID on the tenant.
Right.
What about tenants that were being evicted prior to COVID?
Yeah, they're getting the benefit because there are plenty of evictions that took place that are on hold now because of COVID. And this is prior to March, right?
Correct.
There's warrants that were issued on a general matter. The sheriffs are behind, so it takes them normally 4 to 6 weeks to execute a warrant. So if that fell during the time of when COVID hit, a lot, the
happened to us,
happens.
Two houses.
And those people are still, sitting ducks, and they're not getting evicted, and that's not what the law really says, but there's such a caseload, they're backed up.
They're backed up. We went through 9 months or so to get these tenants evicted. We're ready to have the sheriff go to the house. COVID hits, and here it is another 9 months, whatever the time is, and going on and on.
They're backed up on a normal basis. It's only going to get worse because once these things are able to move forward, how backed up are they going to be? They haven't even dealt with the pre-COVID stuff.
That's right. Exactly. And we're victims of that. And unfortunately, people who don't pay are beneficiaries, even if they're not paying, they just don't feel like it.
Yeah.
And that's so often the case.
It's unfortunate because, again, the taxes are still due by the landlord. Some of these tenants have all utilities included, right? So you have the landlords fronting the bill, paying the utilities. They're not benefiting from it.
Right.
The tenant is.
Right.
And some of these tenants take advantage because they do have the ability to pay. Right?
Yes.
Or they do have somewhere else to go. And these things aren't being addressed by the courts where, those are the ones that are taking advantage, where it's unfortunate that the landlords have to suffer.
Right.
Maybe they can, some of these people are on unemployment, they're still getting money, or their businesses aren't closed and they're making more than before. That's not a hardship. And the law does say they have to demonstrate a hardship to get that relief, but if the courts aren't open to address it,
the courts aren't open to hear it.
That's the practical matter, and that's the issue that we're dealing with.
Being a landlord in New York, the reason we buy the bulk of our rentals out of New York is because New York is just so anti-landlord. So for those of you who have real estate with tenants that aren't paying and you're thinking of getting rid of the property because you'll hear in the next segment that the process and the timetable is going to take from here forward. Well, we're just speculating, actually.
Yeah.
And you want to sell the property. We do buy properties with tenants, even with non-paying tenants. And you can reach out to us at leavethekey.com. That's leavethekey.com. And we sit there and set up a call and come out, and talk to you in person or by phone. Do a drive-by on the house and get a sense. We don't have to get into the house. Tenants who aren't paying do not let you in the house, and we're aware of that. So don't feel that you're stuck. You have no options. You don't have a lot of options. Sit and wait or sell the property, and those really are the options at this point. It's a very, very frustrating state. I know so many people who own a single rental. They worked hard. They saved their money. They put it together so they could buy a single-family house and rent it, and now they're being treated as though they're these mega wealthy people, because that's what Albany thinks, that all landlords are billionaires and 100 millionaires.
Or a charity in some way, right?
Right. And what I always say is, as a landlord, it frustrates me. If I were a grocer, the government does not say that I have to give milk to people who lost their jobs due to COVID. I have to give bread to people who lost their jobs due to COVID. It says we'll give food stamps to people who lost their jobs due to COVID, and you can use those food stamps to buy milk at my store. That makes sense. But to tell a business owner to give their product, which is rent, away for free, or worse, to give a person who owns that single extra house, which is going to be their retirement, and now they're actually worrying about foreclosure, taxes on Long Island are $10,000 or better, those aren't going away. These people have mortgages. They're not waived. Right. Their mortgages on a rental property aren't waived. And suddenly they're paying, $2,000 a month. They were collecting $2,200, and now they're left.
And it's not like it was all profit either. Again,
It's
you know,
not like
their
it was all
profit
profit.
margins, maybe,
Right.
you know,
Yep.
$200-300, not much.
Okay, you're listening to Leave the Key Real Estate Show. I'm here with Anthony
Iadevaia.
One day I'll get it right. I only know the guy for 10 years. To me, he's Anthony. And anyway, we're talking today about evictions. It's a really hot topic with what's going on right now in Washington. They're just talking about how to handle evictions, if they're going to extend them or not extend them. And Anthony's going to give us the update, or I guess the unofficial update until it's actually signed.
Yeah, I'll lead into the update. First things, I'll talk
Sure.
about some of the changes they made in 2019 of June.
Oh,
right?
please.
Because these are some of the things that really affected the landlord, right? I talked about before, they basically increased all the time it takes
Yes.
to evict. Some of the things they did was remove late fees. Landlords can't collect late fees anymore. They're limited to only collecting 1 month's security deposit.
Right.
You know, that in the past, provided some kind of, you know, leverage for a landlord to get 2-3 months rent. That way, if
Right.
they fall behind, they have a little bit of a cushion. That stopped. No more blacklisting for tenants.
Right.
So if a tenant has a bad reputation or a bad history of being, you know, not paying
Right.
their rent and being evicted, the landlord can't use that as a ground to say, hey, I don't want to rent it to you.
Oh, we
because
can still
you have history.
report them.
You can't discriminate based on that history. So it's basically, preventing the landlord to say, hey, I don't want you to be my tenant because you have a bad history of paying your rent.
It's like being an employer, looking at a person's history, it gets fired from every job, but you're not allowed to use that in your hiring decision.
Yeah, you wouldn't want that. That's the prime example of a tenant you don't want in your property.
Right.
You know, they're basically preventing that from happening. You can't get attorney's fees. I mean, so again, it all was designed to make it more difficult and hurt the landlord, and then speeding up to now. You know, now they enacted that eviction moratorium. You know, got extended. Started in June, then in October, kept getting extended. Up until this week, it was December 31st, and then we have, you know, you mentioned it before, the stimulus package that basically they allocated $25 billion in rent relief, which is fantastic if the tenants can get access to that. Another provision was they extended that eviction moratorium another month, another 30 days, and that's January 31st.
Right.
And I think that's temporary.
I'm sure.
With the possibility of it being extended again. If, you know, the transition happens with Biden being in the office. And what did he say? 100-day lockdown. So that's, you know, the thing that I'm worried about is that if that does take place and there's a 100-day lockdown, what do you think is going to happen with evictions?
Right.
You know, this is only a temporary extension, which is possibly going to get extended again in the future.
100-day lockdown doesn't mean 100-day evictions. Those people are going to lose their jobs. And therefore, they're going to have to extend evictions even beyond the 100 days for sure.
You know that's a guarantee that that's going to happen if that's the place, and that's what they're already pushing for.
Yes.
So, you know, it's the uncertainty is there.
This is not the time to own rental property, single-family rentals. And as I say, if you have a single-family rental and you're looking to maybe sell it because you're in this quagmire where you're not collecting rent, you can reach out to us at leavethekey.com. That's leavethekey.com. You can speak with us, and we'll see if we can make an arrangement to buy your property. We do buy houses with non-paying tenants in them. We're lucky enough to be able to afford to hang on to them for a long enough period to make it through this 1 year, 2 years, dare I say 3-year period.
You never know. It's possible. And, you know, the law did exclude certain evictions, which is things that, you know, clients or investors would be able to cite. Hey, the Safe Harbor Act doesn't apply to my post foreclosure.
Right.
Or if you're not seeking for the collection of rent, if you just want to evict for, let's say, you know, there's two types of evictions. There's a non-payment proceeding, which is, hey, you didn't pay my rent, so I want to evict you because you're not paying my rent. And then there's all those protections of financial hardship and your ability to pay. But if the landlord just wants their property back, it's called a holdover. You don't need an excuse. There's usually no defenses to that if they, you know, filed it properly. They're entitled to get their property back without explaining for a reason, and that is excluded. That's a holdover that can move forward. Same thing with violating a lease provision. Hey, no smoking or no animals, and you know you want to have that heard. Those should be going forward, and the law actually says those are excluded from the New York Safe Harbor Act. But
if the court's
the courts aren't open to hear them, they're kind of following the same track and. Yeah, it's excluded, but you're not really realistically getting that remedy or relief because you can't pursue it.
Great news on paper. In reality, it's meaningless.
Yes, pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, we're seeing it now. As I said, we have tenants who are being evicted really with days away from the sheriff putting stuff on the curb. They just stopped paying rent because they just felt like it. And they had their jobs. The income hadn't changed. They just chose not to pay rent. There are a lot of good tenants out there, but some are professional deadbeats, and I hate to say it. They go from house to house to house.
Yeah, absolutely.
And now that you can't use this information against them, as you just said, it makes their job, their life, I should say.
Easier.
I'll almost call it job, even easier. They'll do is they move into your house, don't pay rent, and they rent rooms in your house, and they collect rent.
Absolutely. They're a lot more lucrative. It's not a financial hardship of the situation there anymore.
Correct.
And again, it's their burden to prove. So if you do have that information to say, hey, you're subletting, you're actually making money. But again, if the courts aren't here to listen to that argument,
Okay, in the last few minutes,
advantage.
we have about 4 minutes left. If you want to summarize down the pike, and is there any hope and any actions that the homeowner can take at this point?
Again, the courts are opened. There are courts that are addressing things, not right now, but there are court dates depending on your locale, where you are. The city is a lot worse than Long Island, and Suffolk County a lot better than Nassau County. So I guess the further east you go, historically, the little better it would be. Things move a little quicker. There's a smaller courtroom, smaller calendar. So they would be able to address or hear things. But even those smaller courthouses with, let's say, the holdover or the post-foreclosure eviction, they're giving out court dates of March, April. Right. And that's something traditionally where you'd be able to get a court date in 2 or 3 weeks. And then even when you're in court, within 2 weeks, you could have a trial. These things move very quickly in these jurisdictions in Long Island. That's not the case anymore right now. And
so you wait 4 months for a trial date. And then what do I expect at that point? What happens at that first date?
We don't know because everyone's going to be looking to see what happens at the end of the eviction moratorium, what's going on with COVID, right? Because that's basically what everyone's following. If there's going to be a shutdown, we can guarantee that these things aren't going to be moving.
That's right.
And 2021 is only going to be worse.
Now,
and they're also, they're enacting, just like that bill that was just introduced now, they're trying to make that moratorium for 1 year after the end of COVID.
Oh, my
so
gosh.
COVID isn't over yet, and they're basically saying, hey, we want the eviction moratorium to be 1 year after COVID ends, when is that going to be? So you can only imagine the hardship that, again, I understand tenants that had lost their jobs. They're not being evicted right now, so they're protected. It's the landlords that are suffering. They're still paying the taxes, the utilities, their mortgage if they don't got a forbearance, right? So these are the ones that are actually fronting the bill, and the landlords are suffering more.
As a matter of fact, in April, shortly after COVID hit, we went around, we had our property manager go around and deliver bags and bags of groceries to every one of our homes that we rent because we felt badly. Even if these people didn't lose their jobs, it's a hardship on everybody. But
nobody should be thrown out on the street.
No one should be thrown on the street.
People that deserve the relief should be getting the relief,
without
not
a
ones
doubt.
that are taking advantage
and
of it.
I don't want to evict anyone in that position. We'll do what we have to do to keep them in place. But we try to make some arrangements with them, but many aren't willing to work with you. But the professionals, they just don't do anything. And as I said, they're making money off my house and not paying me rent. And if I were a homeowner and I had one rental, boy, that would make me angry.
That's a crucial part. And the profit margins aren't so big, especially when you're flipping. And then if you didn't factor in carrying costs for a year, it's going to make a profitable situation a complete loss very quickly. And if you didn't have the ability to carry that money, if you borrowed it, forget it. The interest, if it was a hard money lender, it's only going to compound and get worse and worse and worse. And then you can't even get rid of it to cut your losses because another investor is not going to buy it if they're in a situation right now where they're going to be stuck because it's occupied.
And I have a question to make matters even better here, and I use that word sarcastically, and that is, if you are a landlord and you're supplying utilities and your tenant's not paying rent, do you have the right to cut off the utilities?
I wouldn't. You're taking a chance. It's a big problem.
I was always told, don't do that. So you're left now footing the taxes, maybe footing a mortgage if you have a mortgage, paying utilities, and they're not taking care of the place for sure.
Of course not.
And now you're left holding the bag, collecting no rent, which already has been 9 months. It may be extended till the end of COVID, you said, and then another year. It could be another year and a half. It could be 2.5 years without rent. Think how many people are going to go into foreclosure with that.
Yeah.
And so it's beyond my realm of comprehension that this thing can go on and the government doesn't see that landlords are people too, and that the landlords need help. And again, even the wealthy landlords with mega buildings, they just have mega problems. It's not like they're doing fine.
Right. If the numbers are in the red, it's only going to get worse. The numbers are numbers.
Numbers are numbers. And the more you have, the bigger the red. If you own one house and you're losing $10,000 a year is one thing. You own 100 houses, you're losing 100 times more. But anyway, I thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
It was
Pleasure
wonderful
having
speaking with you. You've been listening to the Leave the Key Real Estate Show. I'm Larry Wagner. You can reach me at leavethekey.com.